Here are 6 incredibly sound arguments for the existence of God, presented by none other than Dr. William Lane Craig.
I think there are quite a number of different arguments for the existence of God. Let me just list some of them that I've defended in my work. One would be the contingency argument that holds that God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists, rather than nothing.
The argument from contingency. So everything in existence is either contingent upon something else or it's necessary for something else. Some things are both contingent and necessary, but all things are one or the other at least. That's a philosophical fact. But everything that we see, everything around us is contingent. But that's a logical impossibility. There must be something that is ultimately necessary, that everything is ultimately contingent upon. What does everything else depend on? And no, you can't just run around in circles of contingency. There must be an ultimate necessary entity.
A second would be the Kalam cosmological argument, which argues that God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe at some time in the finite past. God brought the universe into being from nothing.
The cosmological argument. Can you just infinitely regress? Can you just say, well, this came before this, and this before this, and this before this, and this before this? Well, no, you can't, because if there's an infinite past, an infinite history to the universe, how would you have ever gotten to today? And those of you who might say, well, what caused God then? If everything must have a cause to it, then what caused God? Well, no, you're misunderstanding the argument. The argument is that everything that began to exist has a cause. And we know that the universe began to exist. But no biblical description of God presents a being that began to exist. He's actually distinct from creation, meaning he was never created, but he has always been.
A third argument would be the design argument, which holds that God is the best explanation for the remarkable fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe for intelligent life.
It scares me to imagine the math behind this universe existing without a God in the way that it does. The amount of life that actually flourishes in this world. Like the amount of things that have to go right in every single moment for life not to get snuffed out forever. It just seems like an odd thing to believe that this is not designed, but it's random.
Another argument would be the moral argument, that God is the best explanation for the existence of objective moral values and duties in the world.
The atheists say that we have a problem of evil, but I say that they have a problem of good. How can you judge something as good or indeed evil if there is no moral foundation from which you can judge it? And if you say, well, I just have a feeling, well, I just think it's to do with society's standards, then it's not objectively evil. It's just something that you're averse. And in another instance, somebody could be averse of the exact opposite thing that you're averse to. So who's right? There is clearly a moral standard. You have to really seriously violate your conscience, your most basic knowledge of anything, to say that morality is just a social construct and isn't real.
I would also think that the ontological argument for God's existence is a sound argument, which argues that the very possibility of God's existence implies his actuality, and that therefore, if God is even possible, it follows that God exists.
This is a really powerful argument. If it's possible that God exists, he must exist. Let's say Jesus Christ, let's say the God of the Bible. If that's possible, then because of who that God is, because of his characteristics, i.e. existence itself, he must actually exist in reality. You would have to somehow prove that it is impossible that God exists for God not to exist. And if there's a shred of likelihood that he does, he exists.
And finally, as I said, I think we can know that God exists through personally experiencing him as a kind of properly basic belief, in the same way that I know that the external world exists or that the past is real.
It's all good and well having evidence, and it's good. Like if Christianity is true, we ought to have evidence that Jesus rose again. If God is real and we believe in him, he ought to be philosophically likely or necessary. But Jesus has no problem with you being a Christian because you've responded to the experiences of your life, because you've looked at this world and said, God is real. I know what he's taken me through. I don't need a science experiment to know that my brother has my back or that my wife is faithful. I know them. And in the same way, Christ made himself knowable to all of us through his work on the cross. There's philosophical, archaeological, historical, scientific evidence of God, but God wants you to know him through walking with him. Thanks so much for watching. We'll speak soon.